Coming up in this video.
Everything was going great. I stopped the timer, and then I realized there was one problem. Cube was solved. What possibly could have been the issue?
This past weekend, I competed at Samika Solving 2023, which was my first competition since Nationals. As most of you know, I set the clock FWR. Why can't I say this? As most of you know, there I set the clock FWR single with a time of 3.77, but there are also quite a few things that most of you don't know. So I'm making this video to talk about what happened because I actually think it was pretty interesting. Leading up to this competition, I did a ton of practice. I did roughly 5,007 simulsolves over the past 2 to 3 months. For this competition, I set 3 goals for myself. The first one was to break my 6.24 PR average of 5, which has been standing for about a year now. Second was to break my PR single of 5.27, which has also been standing for about a year. Honestly, I didn't think this goal was as possible as the other two, just because it was a low 5, and low 5s are kind of common for me, but with competition nerves and stuff, I didn't know how doable that actually would be. I knew I could get a low 5, like it was possible for that to happen. I even thought that I could possibly get sub 5, but I didn't think really anything about sub 4. I thought there was like a 1% chance that I get a sub 4. I mean, I only had 3 sub 4s prior to the competition. My main goal was to podium. I had been looking at the psych sheet the moment I registered, and I think I was ranked about 4th, but considering that I have been using 7 Simul and I'm a little faster now, I bumped myself up by a ranking or 2. So I was pretty much guaranteed a podium if I didn't DNF. There was a possibility I could also get 2nd. I wasn't expecting to reach all my goals. I wanted to meet at least 1, but the one I really wanted the most was the podium. And honestly, it wasn't for the gift cards, it wasn't for the recognition, it wasn't for the certificates or the medals. I've gotten PRs throughout every single competition. My PR streak hasn't died yet, which I think it might die soon. I've only podiumed in one other competition before this one, so at this point I really would rather a podium than a PR. Alright, so let's go on and talk about my performance in this competition. So instead of talking about the average that I got the FWR single in, let's rewind to earlier that day during round 1. When I was practicing for this competition at home, I had been debating on whether or not I should use 7 Simul or flip for the first round of clock. 7 Simul could possibly get me some PRs, great average, single, but there was a possibility that I could DNF. Right now, my success rate is about 80 to 85%, so that means I have a 1 in 5 chance of getting a DNF. Also, competition nerves are a thing, and that could hinder my performance. So, I went up for my first solve, and I decided to use 7 Simul, just to see how it would go. I ended up DNFing the solve. It was off by like 1 tick, so I didn't really mess up memorization, I just didn't turn accurately. Before the first solve, I had decided that if I did DNF, I would continue using flip for the rest of the round, but when I went to the waiting area, I realized that I didn't mess up memorization, so there was a possibility I could still do well with 7 Simul in this round. I decided that I would flip the clock over before I stopped the timer just to make sure that it was solved, and then fix it if there were any mistakes. So then I went up for the second solve, used 7 Simul again, but this time I was a little uneasy about my memorization. I was already about 10 to 12 seconds into inspection, which is about how long inspection usually takes me. So I didn't have time to review my memorization. I went ahead, I did the solve, I flipped the clock over to make sure because I wasn't 100% certain that I did the memorization right. So I flipped it over, 2 edges ended up being not solved, and so I fixed it, stopped the timer, I ended up getting a 10.47. So then I went back to the waiting area, and I did a little more thinking. I was wondering if 7 Simul was actually worth using the rest of this round. I was thinking about how I got that DNF, and I already had a counting 10. I didn't know what would guarantee me finals, so I was like, you know what? I'm just going to use flip the rest of the round.
I didn't want to DNF because if I made it to finals, then I would have another chance, extra 5 solves, and all the DNFs that I got before didn't matter anymore. It's a fresh start. I just wanted to be sure that I would make it to finals and not DNF or get a really bad average. So I used flip the rest of the time. My third solve was a 6.93, the fourth solve was a 7.39, and the final solve was a 6.57. This ended up being a sub 9 average of 5 of 8.26 seconds, and it got me to finals. Fast forward to finals. Fast forward to finals, I started using 7 Simul again. I ended up DNFing my first solve. One of the edge clocks were off by 1, so I knew I had to make sure my memo was right to keep my average. Usually I go through it quickly and then I review to make sure that I got everything. But instead, I decided to, so that I could be more accurate, instead of going through it quickly and reviewing, I would just go through it once and at a slower pace. That ended up serving me well. My second solve ended up being a 5.2 PR single. I had already knocked out one of my goals. Now I just had 2 more. So then here comes the third solve. This is where it gets interesting. So the judge lifts the cover. I look at the puzzle. I do my memorization at a slower pace once again. Placed my hands on the timer. Picked up the puzzle. Began solving. Everything was going great, at least from what I could see. I stopped the timer. The judge picks up the puzzle. Checks it to make sure it's solved. Confirms it's solved. Pick up my GoPro. Show the timer. Stopped recording. And then I realized there was one problem. The cube was solved. The time was about 6.11. This gave me a lot more confidence with breaking my PR average, and I was getting closer and closer to the podium. What possibly could have been the issue? Well, after I stopped recording, I glanced at the clock and the timer. But from the corner of my eye, I saw my phone was laying right next to it. Usually this wouldn't be an issue, but each time I compete, I connect my GoPro to my phone so that I can make sure everything is framed well. I always make sure to flip it over so I don't violate any regulations. For those of you that don't know, you're not allowed to have a real-time video playing because you could see other angles of the cube, and that's cheating. But this time, I completely forgot to do so. Now, nobody saw this happen. Not the judge, none of the spectators, none of the competitors, and none of the delegates. I didn't notice this during the solve, and it didn't give me an advantage at all, but I had a decision to make. I really wanted this podium. It even guaranteed me a silver medal, which is something I have never received before. Part of me did not want to say anything. I mean, I didn't benefit from it anyways, so it was fair, right? Well, the more I thought about it, the more I felt I had to be honest. So I called for a delegate. Delegate came over. I explained what happened to her. I did include that I did not see it while solving and didn't notice the screen was facing me until the solve was complete, but it was still a DNF. I didn't expect her to let me slide. She ended up telling me that she's done an average before and she left her earpiece in and it ended up DNFing her entire average. I was pretty disappointed. I didn't reach my other goals that were more important to me than the one I had already reached. And the thing is, I don't know when I'm competing next, so it might be a while when I have another round of clock. So since I already had a DNF average, I was like, well, I have 2 more solves. It doesn't really matter if I get a DNF because it's not going to affect my average. I'm just going to go for speed at this point. You know what, maybe I can break that PR single again. Maybe get a low 5, or maybe I'll even get that sub 5. So, I went ahead, my next solve, I did it. It was 6.16, which if I didn't get the DNF before, that would have been second place, sub 6 average, would have met both my goals. Then it was time for my final clock solve of the competition. I didn't think anything of this solve. I was like, okay, this is it. I worked so hard for this average and this podium, and it didn't happen. Let's just see what happens now. So the runner brings over my puzzle, places it on the table. I warm up with my other clock, carefully doing moves to make sure that I'm turning more accurately. I put the clock down, tell the judge I'm ready. He lifts the cover. I start inspection, and I see this lucky case that usually means I can get a good solve. I got quite a few skips in inspection, so there were quite a few of you asking how I inspect in 8 seconds. That usually doesn't happen. Most of the time, I can inspect in about 10 to 12 seconds, so that was quick for me as well. Set the clock down, placed my hands on the timer, began the solve, and I felt it flowing just so well. And I was like, I'm gonna get this 4. It's gonna happen. The turning was pretty smooth for the most part, but towards the end, it was slightly rough, which is a little hard to see in the footage, but I'll tell you, it did happen. Stopped the timer, I'm like, this is it. I got a 4. Look down at the timer, and I see 3.77. In that moment, I was like, no way. This isn't real. I asked the judge, I was like, is it good? And I was convinced that he was going to say, it's a DNF. It's off. He flips the clock over. He goes, yeah, it's good. But then he goes on and says, wait, is it? Picks up the clock again, looks at the side that was facing up when I stopped the timer, so I knew that side was already solved. He looks at that side, then he flips it over, and he tells me it's good, and I was like, whoa, this is pretty cool.
But the story doesn't end there. I had no idea it was FWR single. I knew it was like top 3, but I didn't know it was FWR. So I get up, I walk over to my dad. Honestly, I don't remember much that was said then. The competition for me just kind of like stopped. Like it was like the competition went on for everyone else, but for me it like almost like stopped. And I don't know, I was just like so shocked that this happened. Definitely wasn't expecting it at all. So we look at the rankings. He pulls up the female rankings. And number 1 says 3.87. I was doubting myself. I went to go check the footage again, and then I realized I had 3.77. I was like, that's female world record. Honestly, it still doesn't feel real to me. I don't know how soon I'll be able to break this. Definitely hope that I can break my PR average in my next competition. But I'm really, really happy with this solve. I would like to thank you all for getting the video that I uploaded to where it's at now, and all of your encouraging comments. Thank you for that. Next, I'll be going for FWR average, but honestly, I don't know how soon that will happen, but that will be my next goal. But first, I probably should break my 6.24 PR average. I plan on making a reconstruction soon, so look out for that. Other than that, I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I've never done a video like this before, so let me know what you think. But that's all for this story. I thought it was pretty cool. I'll see you guys next time. Peace out. If you want to buy the best speed cubes, be sure to get them at thecubicle.com. They have a wide selection of cubes and weekly sales that you don't want to miss out on. Be sure to use my code PEACEOUT at checkout for a piece out of your total.